So you will have learned from the active learning in this learning unit that an HDR image is a 32-bit image that is usually made up of multiple images combined together to create a wider range of exposure. So I'm not going to go into the technical explanations here. You will have already learnt about that. But basically, if you've got a high-end digital camera like a DSLR, you can shoot what's called bracketed photos, which is you set your camera so that you can shoot a low exposure, auto exposure, and high exposure photo all at once, so that you can use those three exposures to combine them together into a 32-bit image that has a high dynamic range, HDR. In other words, a higher range of exposure to play with. So what I have here is three images that I'm supplying you with in this folder called HDR Images, and I shot these using three different exposure levels, but my camera has an auto bracket feature, so I can automatically set it to take these three levels of exposure. So there's auto exposure, that one. There's an exposure value of 0.3, and there's an exposure value of minus 0.3. So very slightly different levels of exposure. So in Photoshop, you can use their HDR Pro feature to combine these photographs together. Now, if you have a phone and you use the HDR feature, it's pretty much doing all of that automatically. So it's shooting the three photos and combining them all at once into one HDR photo. So it's becoming more and more of an automated process. But if you want absolute control as a photographer, Photoshop has some really good HDR features. So what I'm going to do is, instead of opening, I'm going to go File, Automate, Merge to HDR Pro. I'm going to then browse to that folder. Okay, so it's HDR Images, and I'm going to select those three images, open, and press OK. And then Photoshop will load those three images in, and it will then bring up the HDR Pro dialog box. Okay, so there's a lot of presets here. I mean, HDR is quite powerful. You can do a lot with it, but what I want to do is just get the best possible result out of these three exposures. So the first thing is remove ghosts. Now this photo is of water and clouds. Now even if these three photos were shot a tenth of a second apart, there may be a slight difference in the water, the waves on the water, or the position of the clouds. So I want to remove ghosts, which means if there's a slight difference, it will use whichever photo has the green outline as the primary photo and then remove any differences between that photo and the other photo. So I'm going to choose the middle one as my primary photo. And then I can start playing around with some of my settings. I'm going to leave it on 16-bit, just simply because most of the time when you are doing this kind of work, it's going to end up you're going to be sharing it on social media, or you're going to be printing it. So 32-bit is probably overkill. In fact, most computer screens don't even have the ability to show the full 32-bit range of color. So you're wasting resources if you go all the way to 32-bit. You can, but I normally don't bother. I normally just use 16-bit, and also I get more controls here. So I'm going to take the gamma level up. Okay, so this is going to bring some of the detail out in the the highlight areas, and I'm going to take exposure up a bit, and then also detail. Okay, so it's starting to actually crisp up the detail quite a bit. I want the shadows to be lighter. The highlights I'm going to take down a bit. Vibrance I'm going to take down quite a lot. I don't want this to be too much a kind of colorful picture. It's kind of a very menacing cloud formation that I photographed. So I want the photograph to have that kind of mood. So I'm desaturating it quite a bit, but I'm not making it a black and white photo, I'm just desaturating it. And then up here, radius and strength allows you to really bring out the crisp edges and the sharpness. Okay, so that's a huge difference. It's just and that's how you can usually identify an HDR photo, by those kind of crisp edges that you get. And I'm going to put edge smoothness on and just take the strength down a little bit. Okay, so that's an interesting result. Let's just take this detail. Okay, I think that's about right. I have a tendency to overcook my photos because I'm usually lecturing on a data projector, and data projectors have really rubbish color. So I tend to overdo my settings. But if you're doing it for yourself, you might want to be a little bit more subtle. Just press OK. So it's going to process them into one photo. And so yeah, I've probably overdone it a little bit with the detail, but let me just load one of those original images in as a layer. So I'm just going to take the auto exposure one, and you can see the difference between the two. So that's the auto exposure one, and that's the one with HDR. So huge difference using HDR in terms of bringing out detail and stuff like that. So just follow these steps, and also I would say look on your phone and see if you can shoot photos HDR and maybe just bring those into Photoshop and play around with them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and see you next time.